Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum podcast. My name is Citizen Strife, and after a couple of weeks of dealing with Cowboy Bebop, we're back in the video game realm this week with one that I can say with absolute certainty caught me by surprise, and I haven't stopped since. So, one of these things is when you play a game that a lot of people have heard of and there's a lot of hype around them, you wonder sometimes, like, can it live up to the hype? Or what is it about a certain game that always grabs you? And to me, visual novels are kind of like halfway between RPGs and other game types, but usually done in the Japanese sphere, Japanese influence in a lot of cases, and Phoenix Wright certainly is that. I was not into them when they first came out. They were on the Game Boy Advance and whatnot. But when the DS and the 3DS started coming out, this is when I started really recognizing the Phoenix Wright franchise as something that was really special. And it's certainly something that a lot of people enjoy as well. So going back and, checking out footage over the last couple of months, because I did a stream on the first game. Haven't really delved back into the series, but I made it a point to rewatch as many games as possible, and I'm actually working my way through Apollo Justice right now, which, again, a lot of people are going to say, why are you doing that one? I'm like, well, you gotta watch them all to see where the trends come in and where things build, because the benefit of Phoenix Wright is it is a very sequential series. There are some spin-offs here and there, like the Professor Layton crossover, the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles that just came out, but more often than not, Phoenix Wright has had, I'd say, 6 games to this point, couple of spin-offs with the investigation style, but they build on each other. So this is one of those things where, unlike the other games in the series that I've talked about, you do kind of have to start at the beginning, because if you don't, then you miss a lot of, like, the little nuances and the building blocks of what it became before. And going through the original game again with a more keen eye really tells you what they were going for, what they ended up building, and especially for, say, the third game, which is usually everybody's favorite and certainly my favorite so far. But the first one has its own place, for better or for worse. And how I'm going to go over this is I'm going to talk about the characters, I'm going to talk about the plots of each cases. I'm going to avoid spoilers in almost all cases, save for one, so let that be a warning. I'm not going to spoil the cases and who's done it or how they did it or whatever. But if it's something that revolves around the story of this podcast or anything that I have to do later, I do have to spoil some things in the story as it progresses, because the games can't really function without me talking about them. And so be forewarned that there is, like, a spoiler coming up, but it is early enough in the game that it's not going to, like, wreck it if you've never played these before. So yes, the plot, the characters, how each case presents itself without going into the, like, super nitpicky specifics, and then kind of how each case, for lack of a better term, has a battle system, because this isn't a battle system. This is a visual novel. But there is a health bar, and there is a way of going about the game. So there are positives and negatives as usual. So I'm following my same path. If I get to the other games in the franchise, or if I do games in a sequential order, like I'd say a Donkey Kong game or a Mega Man game, when you get a certain, like, setup for this is the case, this is the whatever, it's going to be the same setup as I normally would do a podcast. So that's a forewarning for anyone who's new to this. And I think this should be a nice, interesting examination of Phoenix Wright for people who have not really played it, but probably heard of them. And of course, because I have to do it, objection! I'm going to do that over and over and over, and I hope I get better at it. The only problem is I'm off camera and I can't really point at the screen. I mean, I can point, but it's not going to matter. But anyway, I got it out of my system. Let's go. And we'll start with characters. Because if anything else, this game franchise is sold on its characters. And yes, it's gameplay. But the characters, especially the central ones, are really the driving force and the reason why anything works. Because you have your main characters, your main 4 or 5 or 6 characters that show up. And then you have, in each case, you have 3 or 4 witnesses or potential victims, potential suspects, that sort of thing. So as cases progress, you'll get the minor characters. Think of it like a pro wrestling kind of thing. You have your main protagonist and antagonist, and then the cases are like, well, this is how the wrestling match plays out, and everything kind of goes and flows in its own way. So that's how I'm going to process each case, I suppose. But we'll start, of course, with Phoenix Wright himself. And Phoenix Wright is a do-gooder. He's a goofball. He's got the spiky hair. He's got the flashy blue suit. He's the nice super guy. And he believes in his clients because his mentor believes in his clients. And he started becoming a lawyer mostly because of things in his childhood, but also because of an impact that gets explored in the third game. So his story will get fleshed out as games progress. But as far as the first game goes, he is being mentored, and he's kind of a bumbling idiot, but he's able to keenly, pick up on things, and when he's able to just kind of bullshit his way through a trial, or pick up on an idea that, as you would say, turns the case on its head, that's really the crux of the game. Is he's finding little bits and pieces in a testimony, where he's finding evidence to support a claim that, as games go on, gets more and more ridiculous. But he's able to sense these things and able to just nervously twitch his way and bluff his way. His special power is he is able to just be charismatic enough and talk bullshit enough that even if something doesn't seem like it's true, it ends up becoming true the more he does it. So he ends up just becoming accidentally the best lawyer you could ever imagine. Is it real? No, but much like a wrestling show, you have to have some suspension of disbelief, and in Phoenix Wright's case, you have to suspend your disbelief and just go where the game takes you and go where Phoenix Wright takes you. Outside of cases, he's kind of hard-nosed. He has a sense of humor, but he's very serious about it. So even though he's a bit of a goofball, some of the things that happen to him, he's very matter-of-fact. He looks at things kind of like, well, this is kind of stupid. What the fuck are we doing? But I guess it works. I mean, you have to take things at face value, and he's able to take things at face value and see things both from inside the box and outside the box, and that is his greatest strength. The secondary main character is Maya Fey, and when I said outside the box, I am not kidding, because might as well mention it now. This game is set in Japan, and yet when it was localized, they localized it in California. So even though Maya Fey looks like one of those Japanese priestesses and wears Japanese kimonos and everything looks Japanese, they put in these references to being in LA, even though why would a traditional Japanese village and a spirit channeling lady be in California and talk about burgers? I mean, burgers exist in Japan, I know that, but still, it's still a thing that happens. But as games have gone on, they've lost the pretense of it being it's in California. No, it's not. It's a Japanese game with Japanese people, redone almost like Dragon Quest, where they redo a lot of the names and places to be a lot of jokey references and puns. So be aware of that. As far as Maya goes, her main act in the plot is to be Phoenix Wright's advocate. She doesn't have any lawyering experience. She doesn't want to have any lawyering experience. She's there because of Mia Fey. And Mia Fey is Phoenix Wright's mentor in the first case. So I will dispense with the spoiler that I was talking about earlier, so if you don't want to hear it, speed ahead a couple of minutes. But in the second case, Mia Fey tragically dies. And the crime is pinned on Maya. Phoenix, being the good guy, is able to get her off in the second case. And because of Mia's impact on him, which they explore in the third game, and Maya, she ends up becoming sort of his assistant, secretary kind of thing. But she also uses her powers as a spirit medium. In this game, it's not very strong and it's not very focused upon, but her skill is she's able to call forth someone who has passed away, and that person's spirit will inhabit her body and change their physical appearance to look like that character. So what happens in certain sections of the game is Mia comes back, and Mia herself is very straightforward, very confident, very capable, and is able to help Phoenix when he's lost. Because when he loses his moxie, so to speak, Mia's always there to cheer him up. Maya's always there to cheer him up. And the three of them, Maya in the living sense, and Mia whenever she needs to be called, in this game I think it's 2 or 3 specific times, they come and they help him out, and they figure out how he's able to solve the cases. So he's able to take what they help him with, take the knowledge that he has, and they work on their cases, and they battle up against Miles Edgeworth. And Miles is very cool. And in the first game, a prosecutor was very much I'm going to beat you, I'm going to stop you, I'm going to use anything at my disposal to get my guilty verdict. And Miles is a very foppish, very well-to-do, ill-mannered, but, sharply dressed. Think of those princely noble type characters, and he's just a prosecutor. So you've got this bumbling dumb fuck on one side, this well-to-do, well-mannered, but I would definitely say less than scrupulous Miles Edgeworth on the other side, and they butt heads in almost every case. Not all of them, but a lot of cases. You do have some other prosecutors here and there, mostly like a goofball in the first case, but he is your introduction prosecutor. He's not very threatening. Winston Payne, I believe. And he's there as your intro, but Miles Edgeworth is your main rival. And they butt heads, and you get that Phoenix, you are so stupid, and here's why. He has that aura about him, and it works so well. So he's able to just point his finger in the air and just stamp his hand on it. But when you get him and he just, you jerk, the rivalry between them works so well, because they have the facials and they have the expressions. Even in the GBA version, they were giving you those little visual cues that give you so much character. So you have them as your main characters. You also have the judge. He's there to kind of observe the stupidity. And sometimes he's stupid. He'll believe pretty much anything, regardless of it. Oh, it's a dead person in my courtroom? What? This thing happened? What? I don't get this. What? He doesn't understand how to just this is bullshit. This makes no sense. He just kind of lets things happen. And he lets Edgeworth run over him. But he also allows Phoenix Wright to get rebuttals and things. He is not a threatening force. He is there to act as a mediator, which judges are supposed to do, but he is meant for comedic effect, for better or for worse. And on the other side of the coin, you have who is technically Miles Edgeworth's flunky, but is also helping Phoenix Wright during a lot of cases, is Dick Gumshoe. He is the bumbling, stumbling detective dork. And if you ever saw those like film noir that, yeah, see, pal, those kinds of guys, he is that guy. He is downtrodden. He has no money. He keeps fucking up, but he is an earnest, well-to-do detective. He's willing to go the extra mile for both the prosecution and the defense. And throughout those first 3 games, he's your main contact during investigations and interacting with Edgeworth on a less prickly basis. But Miles has no time for Dick Gumshoe's bullshit, because Gumshoe sometimes makes mistakes, which I guess happens when you're a bumbling detective. But you have your main players, those 5 or 6 main players, but then you get into the cases. And during each case, you'll have separate people who show up here and there. Sometimes they are recurring characters. Sometimes they're just one-time use characters. But when you have those main 5 or 6 players in every case. So let's get into, say, the cases themselves. I will not spoil how they go about them, but in general, I'll just name the cases, name what's going on, and then you can infer from there. So the first case, like I said before, is your introductory case. And the thing about introductory cases, this is known as the First Turnabout. Turnabout is a phrase. I believe that's what the original naming convention of this franchise was. Turnabout Trial or Turnabout something. It ended up becoming Ace Attorney and Phoenix Wright when they retranslated it, I believe. So Turnabout is a phrase they use in almost every case. But the First Turnabout is your introduction to the courtroom. There is no real investigation stuff, but you have one of Phoenix's friends gets popped for his girlfriend's murder, and you're trying to get him off the hook along with Mia's help. So Phoenix takes the brunt of Winston Payne's stupid shit, but the first cases in almost every game are, here's how the mechanics work, here's how the testimonies go, here's how all of the battles or whatever go, and here's what you do. And it's a very simple 30 or 40 minute case. They don't really overdo it too much, and sometimes they get longer or shorter depending on what needs to. But in the original game, the cases were nice and short and concise and simple. And that first case really gets you into the mode. Second case is where the game really starts, because like I said before, spoiler warning, Mia dies. And you are introduced to Maya Fey. So they're sisters, and Maya was asked by Mia to do something, and they were going to meet up and go to a restaurant, and unfortunately Mia got whacked. Maya was spotted in the room, and you can see where that goes. So Phoenix's job is to get Maya off the hook, and I'd say it works pretty well. It's about 2 or 3 hours. Fairly simple. Like, there's wiretapping, there's other crazy, like, it makes sense. Like, there's wiretaps, you got your witnesses, you got your just general stuff. But you also get introduced to Maya and Mia's relationship. You get the Phoenix, like, Mia was my friend and mentor, and now she's gone, sort of thing. It's like, what the hell's happening there? And it's all a mess. The third case is Turnabout Samurai. They go to a TV studio, and they're going to observe a run-through of a show known as the, I believe, Steel Samurai. There's like 4 or 5 different samurai kid shows. Once again, Japan. Not really, it's California, but it's totally Japan because samurais and princesses and whatever. So they're there investigating a murder of one of the stars. So they're working with one of the stars as a client. And they have to investigate with a security guard lady who is just an old bag. Her name is Old Bag. And she's a crotchety lady. But she has a fondness for Miles Edgeworth, which is strange and ick. But yes, you also have that problem, and then you deal with producers and agents and other, people in the run through. And Maya has this like starstruck look on her face, like, "Holy shit, I'm on a TV studio. This is awesome, ain't it, Nick?" Shit like that. So Phoenix and Maya are here to investigate the murder, why it happened, who's responsible, and whatnot, to try and get their client off. Final case of the original game is Turnabout Goodbyes. Now, this is where the meat of the game presents itself. In every game, there's at least like one or two like major cases. Sometimes they're connected, sometimes they're not, but they're the like 3 to 7 hour. Here's the big one. It's going to take a couple of days to do really serious stuff. And in this case, an incident from 5 or 10 years ago occurs, and it rears its ugly head again. And Miles Edgeworth himself is actually pinned for murder. So Phoenix is reticent, of course, because he's been dealing with Edgeworth for the last couple of cases, and now he has to represent him in this murder case. And now, not only that, who are you facing as a prosecutor? You're facing Manfred von Karma. And dude, this guy's like 55. He is foppish as fuck, but he is mean. His objection is not even like the normal. He's like, "Objection!" And I did it more forcefully, but man, it's just like, oh, it's just this deep, thick, painful, intimidating voice. And like I said before, not every prosecutor is threatening. Miles Edgeworth is threatening because he's very sly and just very point by point, like he'll catch you in a trap. Manfred von Karma is, "I don't have time for your bullshit. You are going to do what I want in no time flat. Do you understand me?" And he's very big, and he is very mean, and he's very scary. So knowing that you have to deal with a second prosecutor who is scary as shit and trained Miles Edgeworth, it's pretty fucking intimidating. And that's where the interesting things lie. When this was re-released onto the DS, which is where I first got it, you actually got a second integral case known as Rise from the Ashes. So not only did they get rid of the naming convention for that, they also added in a lot of interesting things to the case because of the DS technology. They added some like slicker visuals. They had some different characters. So Maya isn't present for this one. So you're actually working with Emma Skye, who is a junior forensics investigator sort of girl from like college and shit. And she's trying to help her sister, Chief Prosecutor Lana Skye, from getting a murder charge. So the worst thing I can say about that one is that it starts off really goofy, but then when you get to the second day, it really ramps up and is really effective and really cool. And a lot of the characters in there are a lot better than they initially seemed, because I streamed it and was not really fond of it and actually kind of quit halfway. And then I went back and watched it a couple weeks ago and kind of regretted my decision, because it was one of those like, oh shit, they really ramped this up. So that's one of those things with Case 5. It's not technically part of the original game. It was something they added to the DS remake. So you can stop with Turnabout Goodbyes if you want. I do think there is a lot to do with Rise to the Ashes, and you kind of do still need to play it, because especially for, say, Apollo Justice, which I'm working with now, Emma Skye herself shows up in Apollo Justice. So you still get a character cameo, and an important one at that, if you go through all 5 cases, even though it's not as connected to the other goings on. So those are the general gists of the cases, and like I said, I tried to avoid spoiling how they work until now. So the general battle system, for lack of a better term, is a visual novel. But you have some choices as to how to proceed. You have some choices on how to investigate and deal with cases. Really, the gameplay boils around to finding evidence and then presenting evidence at the right moments. If you're not right, you lose health, and if you lose too many pieces of health, the game chucks you back and you lose a lot of progress. So you're going to want to save off, and you're going to want to be aware of what people are saying, how they're going to say it. And there are two ways of doing that. Outside of the initial cases, there is the investigation phase. And think of investigation phase as like halfway between, think of like a proto LA Noire. But you're not like super worried about their tells or their things in the investigation phase. You're mostly just seeking evidence. So you're looking around 5 to 10 different environments related to the crime scene. Sometimes there's multiple crimes in the same case that could be interconnected. And it's almost like a puzzle piece. You're trying to find different puzzle pieces that you can use as evidence when you get to the trial. So, for instance, a murder weapon, or an autopsy report, or a blood stain, or blood smear, or fingerprints, footprints, that sort of thing. Sometimes they get on the really weird side, like a broken pieces of, like, in the Turnabout Samurai one, there was a place where there was an animatronic, like a Five Nights at Freddy's looking thing that broke, and it blocked off the path to one of the studios. So it's evidence to support or deny a certain claim as the thing goes on. So you get those like weirder pieces of evidence as you're investigating. Alongside that, you get to talk with Maya through a lot of like weird, like comedic but also serious situations. It's a very comedic game, but when it needs to be serious, it really is effective at changing its mode and changing its tone and not coming off as chintzy. So you're working with Maya and investigating cases in between trials, and you're finding evidence. And sometimes you're talking with Gumshoe, or you're talking with the minor supporting characters, or you're even talking with Edgeworth himself. Because sometimes you're in the detention center, sometimes you're in the crime scenes, and you're investigating. Don't ask me if actual attorneys do this sort of thing. I doubt they do, but that would not be more of a game, I suppose. So think of it like he's almost a private detective sort of thing and an attorney all in one. So again, you have to suspend disbelief a little bit to make it work for the game construct. When you find enough stuff, and the game doesn't let you progress until you find all the evidence, so you're never going to get stuck. So there's no like soft locking. At least in most cases. The only time you'd ever soft lock is if you have like one sliver of health and you fuck up and you just miss something. But I don't think that's ever going to happen, because in the trial phase, that's where you're confronting a witness, and they may or may not be the potential suspect. They may or may not be fingering this potential suspect. But Phoenix's role is to listen to testimony and observe what the judge, the witness, and Edgeworth and Von Karma are saying, try to make his own case for his clients, and make sure, oh, well, no, because this evidence says this, and during testimonies, you get to do what's known as cross-examinations, where you get to reread the testimony, and then you can say, but I don't have enough information, so I'm going to press that. So Phoenix will hold it, and he'll just give some more information and try to feed into it. Sometimes they'll give you more information and add it to their testimony. Otherwise, it's just a kind of an aside. So you have to press not every little thing. Your goal is not to press every single word in every single conversation. You can, and it's beneficial to do so, but you need to find the specific ones to press to get the things. But if you notice something that doesn't add up immediately, you can, use evidence right away. So you have what's known as a court record that gives you names, faces, places, and all the evidence that you accrued. And then that's where you can go, objection! And then you get the, you fucked up, or you get more of the story. So it's a visual novel, but you're given a bit of a puzzle piece format to kind of get all of this information. So you get a bit of a gameplay orientation to it. You're not just pressing X to continue. A lot of that is pressing X to continue, but they add in the investigation phase and the trials to give you some sort of like engagement. And I think that's where Phoenix Wright succeeds versus some visual novels which are pick a certain path and pick a word and whatever. And that's really the meat of the gameplay, doing the investigations and then doing the trials. And then after 2 or 3 hours, or even 5 to 10, you learn what happens in the cases, and then you start to piece together how they did what they did, and then finger a new suspect so that your suspect isn't the one who's guilty. They change that here and there, but the general gist of that is the same. The nice thing about Phoenix Wright is they add things to different games, but the setup tends to stay the same. You've got your job, you've got your investigations, you've got your trials, and then you've got characters that are hopefully engaging enough and stories that are engaging enough that you're willing to keep going. I said about before that that wrestling match thing. Inside of a trial, you're in a wrestling match and you're dealing with like this person over here is like, oh my God, he's the Stone Cold Steve Austin to The Rock. And then sometimes you have the smaller ones where it's like The Miz versus John Morrison, which is like lesser, but it's less exciting, that sort of thing. The wrestling references essentially what it boils down to is you have your main big case that's super, super important, and then you have a couple of cases that are kind of dumb and goofy and light in the mood, but they still have a lot of effort. So your thing with this is finding out which cases work for you, which don't work for you. In most cases, those main event cases are where the real fun and the real meat of the game implies. When it gets to case 1-5, which was added to the DS, they actually added in a few extra cool little things you could do with the stylus. So, because Emma was a forensic specialist, she had all this like fingerprinting technology, and so you could use the DS to like rub this like fingerprinting powder on the screen and then blow it away, and then you reveal a fingerprint. Or you could match a certain thing to this, or you could see this like jar and you're supposed to turn the pieces together to fit them like a puzzle piece to fit the jar back together. Little things like that. I've seen that more in Apollo Justice, where like a woman's slipper had a footprint or whatever in there, and you could use that to match footprints, putting plaster in there. These little things, I don't know if they were necessarily popular mechanics, but I get what they were going for in the DS era. They were trying to add a little bit extra stuff to the formula because 3 or 4 games in, you try different things. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But the core gameplay has always kind of been the same. The core characters have changed here and there, but you know who you're getting. You're getting your Phoenix Wright, you're getting your Maya Fey, you're getting your Miles Edgeworth and Mia Fey here and there to spice up the situation. If I was to say there was any negatives to that formula, the problem I find with Phoenix Wright is not so much with Miles, because he's more of a sly, not huckster, but he still maintains that holier-than-thou aura when he needs to. But when you deal with the same style of gameplay over and over, and you're dealing with different prosecutors, I said before, suspension of disbelief is only so much that you can do. And Miles' whole thing is, I'm going to have a perfect record, and Manfred von Karma is like, I'm going to get this guy's guilty verdict. But the gameplay is designed that you have to beat the game and then do another case. So if you're doing 5 cases and 2 or 3 of them have the same prosecutor, you're sitting there and you're going, if you're going for perfection, I'm beating you? And I don't feel that same aura of intensity from you anymore. And it happens to get worse in the second game or in the third game. But they changed it up enough that prosecutors eventually are just more there on the opposite side looking for the truth rather than antagonistically bitching at Phoenix for beating them all the time. In the original game, Miles is annoyed that Phoenix is beating him, which is fun at first. But again, this is more of an issue with the series being a formulaic one. Formula being a good thing in this case because you want the same setup, because there's only so much you can do to change the setup. But again, when you're trying to build up a main rival, it's kind of hard to have the same feeling for a guy you had in the first case when you've beaten him 4 or 5 separate times, and it just feels like, well, the game's forcing me to win, so I don't feel the same threat. So the aura comes in of like, you're going to lose your client and you don't want them to get a murder rap or something. So that's where that is. My other issue stems from the less important cases. In this case, it would be Turnabout Samurai. The first part of Rise from the Ashes is played more for comedy, and this happens more in the second game and the third game, and sometimes even in the fourth. When you get the super serious case, you're jumping to a less serious one, and it's played more for comedy because it's a lighter mood. It's a murder charge, but it's still like, where is that intense focus? Where is that super intense, oh my god, everything is on the line and everything really hits? Again, this is more of the series itself, and I think when other games get talked about, I'll have other things specific to those games, but this is more of a series-wide, I guess you would call it, an issue. I like the comedy, I do, but when Phoenix himself is bumbling through a case and sometimes the characters that he's dealing with are not all that interesting, it really just drags down the, hour or 2 hours you're spent waiting for the good stuff to happen. Because when the good cases ramp up, they get really good. Or even when the comedic cases stop fucking around and start being more serious, then it starts getting a lot more serious, because you start to notice a trend where the super stupid stuff and the super stupid witnesses were there at first to get you into the mode, and the second or the third day you get the, oh my god, this is the one who really did it, or this is the serious shit that really happened. So you have to kind of go through the comedy to get to the meat of the fun. So you have to remember that it is a comedy game first and foremost, probably 60-40 split, 65-35 if you're being honest. And it is something you notice the more you do it. I think if you don't go through the games on a binge watch like I did, it's probably less frustrating. That being said, when you get the good cases, they're really good. When you get the lesser important ones, they kind of grate on you a little bit. So that's something to be aware of as a franchise. Again, I don't know if I would call these negatives. I would just call them as little warnings for people that the cases themselves can sometimes vary on strength based on where they are in the game and what they're trying to present as a mini story. That being said, though, I talked about the characters. I talked about how strong Phoenix Wright is as a good character. He thinks of his people as innocent and has to a fault, but he's unsure of himself, so he has Maya at his side to help him out in investigations. And then from beyond the grave, Mia will show up and help him in like little spurts and be like, Phoenix, get this figured out, get it right, and make sure it works. So then Phoenix isn't just the perfect defense attorney. He has his faults. He has his uncertainties. He has his issues. And then you're contrasted with Miles, who has to be broken down and brought down a peg. The judge and the Detective Gumshoe are there to balance out the cast and be a little more comedic in spots. So it's very lighthearted. It's a very fun game. It's a very nice game. And the trial variations on occasion, like not every time, it's always murder charges in almost all cases, because that's a very serious charge. It makes sense. I do find Maya gets pegged for murder or kidnapped a little too much for my liking, but again, it's changing the mode of the gameplay a little bit each time. So you get a formula, but it's a formula that either is going to respond to you or not. And I think when it boils down to it as a conclusion, Phoenix Wright is a different style of game. It's its own type of game. You had stuff like Danganronpa who tried to add the horror zero escape element into the Phoenix Wright proceedings and make it a lot more free-flowing and goofy and fast-paced, but the genesis of that style was Phoenix Wright, and it's a very slow build, but it's a very methodical and deliberate style of game. It has its comedy, and it has its serious stuff, and you have to suspend your disbelief at some points because the cases tend to veer off into very strange directions, and that will be present the more that we talk about this franchise at a later date. But for anyone on the fence as far as whether Phoenix Wright is a good series or not, it is definitely a good series. There's a lot of neat characters, there's a lot of awesome cameos, and you get to grow. It's one of those sequels that grows. The characters grow and build, and the more that you experience and the more people you meet, the more they come back and build this world that encompasses this style of gameplay that nobody really does quite like it. It is its own thing that just works. And I don't think you could object to that. At least I couldn't. I've enjoyed this franchise for 10 or 15 years, and I don't see any reason to stop now. But that'll do it for me today. Next week is Goblin Slayer, a fairly recent anime, about 5 years ago. Think D&D meets anime. Pretty much. I mean, it is D&D. The mechanics and the characters are D&D. After that is, I believe, Mega Man X. So much like Phoenix Wright, we'll start a new franchise and a new series and talk about how that started. And Mega Man X is obviously an iconic game, and I have a lot to dig into as far as that goes. After Mega Man X, I believe it will be time for the Matrix movie. Matrix Resurrections comes out in a month. So the cool thing is I'm actually going to rewatch the Animatrix, the animated version of that. I talked about this before. Several different anime shorts made by different animation studios in Japan building off the Matrix narrative, with some cameos from Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss here and there. So that should be really fun. But like I said, we've got Goblin Slayer next week, so we'll go from there. But as far as today goes, hope you guys enjoyed my Phoenix Wright kind of run through, and we'll do more of that franchise as we go along. We'll go into the second game here and there. I don't know when, but hey, I'm enjoying my run through of rewatching the franchise from its inception, and I'm relearning a lot of fondness for this franchise. So if you've never played it, I would definitely pick up the Ace Attorney trilogies on the PS4 or the Switch or wherever. I believe it's also on Steam. You have no excuse not to play this game at least once or to watch somebody stream it. It is fantastic. But that'll do it for me. Citizen Strife, signing off.